Hello. Thank you for your interest in Equidox PDF remediation software. My name is Dan Toletta, and I'm a senior sales engineer here with the Equidox team. The purpose of this video is to give you a brief demonstration and an introduction into our Equidox solution. So let's get started. The first thing that I always mention about Equidox is that it is a web-based application. So you'll notice that I'm just operating through my browser. The nice thing about being a browser-based application is that as a user, you don't have to install and update and manage software on your different devices. You can really be using Equidox from anywhere, assuming you have an internet connection. The other nice thing about being web-based is our concurrent user licensing model. So what I mean by that is, let's say, hypothetically, your organization purchases 10 concurrent licenses of Equidox. That would mean 10 different people can be using it simultaneously. However, we don't put a limitation on how many people you can grant access to. So maybe you have 50 people that have access to Equidox, but they can be sharing a smaller subset of licenses because most people are not full-time document remediators where they need round-the-clock access to a PDF remediation tool. So for those users that only need to log in once a week or once every few weeks to work on a few small projects, they can use that seat temporarily, and when they log out, that seat can then be used by someone else. So it's very flexible and allows you to deploy it to a much broader group of users without having to dedicate an annual subscription to every person that might need to use a remediation tool once in a while over the course of a year. And then one last nice thing about being web-based is that Equidox is naturally collaborative. So what I mean by that is, let's say hypothetically, you have a very long, complicated, high priority document. Maybe it's the annual reports and it needs to be posted by lunchtime today. Well, in theory, that's a big task for one person to clear their calendar and have to rush through hundreds of pages and do it all by themselves. So you could have multiple people working on the document simultaneously. So if it's a 200-page report, and it needs to be done ASAP, maybe your 4 best remediators each take a 50-page section of it. They can work together on those individual pages without disrupting each other, and you can get the document done in a fraction of the time. So just keep some of that in mind. It's a different approach because of the web-based aspect of Equidox. Now, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to the import document screen. And that is going to take me to this view where I can click to open up the folders on my hard drive. Or if I have my folders already open, I can also just do a drag and drop of a document or multiple documents into this rectangular area. Once that document has a brief second to upload to the cloud, the blue import button will become available. Pressing the import button will kick off this automated process where Equidox is going to evaluate this file. The first thing it's going to look for is to see, is there any existing tag structure? Well, this document, just so everyone's aware, does not have any existing tag structure. If I were to open it up, we would see that there's no accessibility tags whatsoever, which essentially means that a screen reader or any sort of assistive technology that relies on the accessibility tags will not be able to read this document. So we, of course, need to fix that. So we're going to go back into Equidox, and I'm going to go back over to the document list, and we will see that the document that I just imported is now right here waiting for me. So when I click on the document that I just imported, it's going to open up the document detail page. In the document detail page, we can see some of the basic information about the PDF. Most obvious is that we have one thumbnail here, so we have one page to deal with in this PDF. Up here, I have buttons to export the document back to the PDF format if I'm ready to do so. I'm not quite ready for that because all we've done so far is import it, but we will get to that point eventually. I could share the document with different users. So again, if you wanted to collaborate or work with someone else on this document, you can share it with a user or a group of users if your administrator creates groups, perhaps based on departments or individual teams within your organization. And one other button here is to delete the document. Now, I'm not going to delete the document, but the only reason I mention this is because most people wonder, is there a limit to how many documents you can import or documents you can keep in your Equidox account? There's no limitations or restrictions like that. It is unlimited use. You can import and export and have as many documents in your account that you would like. But you are more than welcome to delete stuff as you go or clear out duplicates or old clutter. That's totally your choice. But there is no real need to. You can have as many documents as you'd like. Down below, I'm just going to briefly mention the properties of the document. Now, the properties are pretty simple, but they're often kind of forgotten about and overlooked. One of the important properties is the document title. A lot of documents, in my experience, probably 75% of the documents that I come across, they will fail accessibility checkers for not having a title. So the title is left blank by the document author because it's not very intuitive to go into the document properties menu and manually enter in a title. A lot of people forget to do that, or they just don't know that they're supposed to do that. So what Equidox will do in the event that your document doesn't have a title is, to avoid leaving it blank, it will take the file name and it will plug it into the title field for you. This is purely an effort to not leave the title field blank, because if it's blank, your document is automatically deemed to be inaccessible. Really, nothing else matters beyond that point. However, this is a good example of a file name that the author of the document might choose to use acronyms and abbreviations and just kind of a crazy naming convention that makes perfect sense to them. But this would not really make sense to most people, specifically if you're using a screen reader and it's trying to read these abbreviations and all of the words smushed together. This is going to be very, very confusing when you're hearing this read to you through your assistive technology. So just to take a brief moment to phonetically spell things out, putting spaces between words, it can really make a big difference for how the screen reader user is interacting with this document, as the document title is really their first impression of the PDF. Another property is the author. Now, oftentimes the author could be pre-populated, perhaps with someone's name. A lot of times, like for a Microsoft Word document, let's say, whoever owns the Microsoft license of where the document came from when they hit save as PDF will end up populating the author field. So if you want to change the author, you can. Maybe you want to say it's the name of the organization, or maybe it's the department or something like that. You can always modify the author here right inside of Equidox. However, it should be noted that authors are not required for accessibility compliance. So it is an optional property, but you can always add one or modify it if needed inside of Equidox. One other property to mention is the language attribute. You'll notice that Equidox sets the language of the document to English by default. The assumption being that the majority of documents that flow through Equidox are written in English, but of course there can be many exceptions to that. So if you have a document that is written in a different language, you can change the language by using this drop-down menu. Now, Equidox is not a translation tool, so we're not here to convert an English document into Romanian, let's say. But if you had a Romanian document, you want to make sure that the screen reader that is interacting with that Romanian content understands to change its settings so that it can read the Romanian with the proper cadence. If you have an English screen reader trying to pronounce Romanian words, it is going to sound very silly, if not just a bunch of gibberish to a native Romanian speaker. So you need to make sure that you are adjusting that accordingly. But again, we set it to English by default. So in the majority of cases, it kind of takes care of the language attribute requirement for you, and you can adjust it on the fly if needed. We will save the properties because I did make some changes here. And now that those properties are handled, I'm going to jump into the one and only page, and we'll talk about how we go about remediating this. Now, the first thing that you probably notice when we open up the remediation page are these yellow rectangles that are covering up all of the content. These yellow rectangles are what we refer to inside of Equidox as reading zones. And reading zones are really the same thing as tags. They will produce the tag structure when we get to the point of exporting the PDF. So we are going to use Equidox to manipulate and manage these reading zones to ensure that the screen reader user has a good overall experience when they are interacting with this page. So how do we know what the screen reader user is going to experience? Well, in Equidox, we have this really important feature. It's this button right here that looks kind of like a computer monitor. If you click on it, what it will do is it will open up a separate tab in your browser, and it will give you this HTML preview of the page that you are currently working on. And the reason why we use this HTML preview is because this is just a simple linear representation of how a screen reader would interact with this page if we were to just stop working and export the document in its current form. So as we make changes to the PDF in the zone layout, we will see how those changes impact this HTML preview as we go. Now, right now, looking at the HTML preview, we can see that there is a whole bunch of content on the page. It's all technically going to be read out loud, but there's more nuance to this PDF than just making sure that everything is read out loud. So we have headings, we have a list, we have a table, we have some images. So we have work that we need to do to make sure that the screen reader user has a good experience, but we will see how the changes that we apply to the PDF impact this HTML preview as we go through the steps to remediating this document. So if I go back to Equidox, the first thing I want to point out is this feature that, to be honest, I don't really need to use this feature on this page, but this little slider up here, if you move it back and forth, you'll notice like how Equidox redefines those reading zones for you. As you move it around, it's kind of changing the sensitivity in which it's detecting the content. So of course, with PDFs, you can have many different types of layouts and formatting and different sized fonts and different spacing of paragraphs and such. So you might have different needs for different settings. So as you move this back and forth, it's just giving you different options. Really what you're using the slider for is to try to find like the path of least resistance to producing a nice accessible page. So just hypothetically, let's just say that you started by dragging the slider way over to the right, and it kind of zooms out and gives you more of a 10,000 foot view of the page. If you were to go back to your preview after making that choice, you'll see the instant impact where now you have this giant paragraph that's kind of consolidating all of the content on that page into one long, crazy run-on paragraph. This is clearly not how this page is intended to be presented to someone. So we don't really want to choose that as our starting point, because this would require a whole bunch of manual adjustments and resizing zones and drawing new zones. There's really no advantage to starting like this. So we're just going to go back to something like we had in the beginning, something where we have the right number of zones to kind of make our adjustments to. Now that I've chosen my starting point, the first thing that I typically assess on any individual PDF page is the heading structure. Now, the heading structure in this document is relatively simple. There are 5 total headings covering 3 separate heading levels. And like always, we're going to start our heading structure with a heading level 1, and that is going to be this zone right here. So this big bold font at the top of the page, which kind of tells us what the entire document is all about, seems like a very natural heading level 1 to me. But right now it is just a text zone, because remember, we started with a document that was completely untagged. So all Equidox really knows at this point is that there is text right there. This is technically text, but from an accessibility standpoint, we need to set this up as a heading level 1. Now, there are 2 ways of changing zone types. You can use this drop-down menu, and I can scroll down and I can find heading and I can change it that way. I personally find that to be pretty slow. So if I want to set this as a heading level 1, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, where all I have to do is tap 1 on my keyboard, and it will instantly change itself to a heading level 1. These next 2 headings are kind of defining major sections of information about our SaaS products and our Equidox AI offerings. But if I just tap 2 on my keyboard, I can set them both as heading level 2s. So we're dropping down from our heading level 1 into our heading level 2 section. And then these headings below are subheadings of this H2. So they're getting a little bit more detail talking about Equidox AI. So I'm just going to tap 3 on my keyboard to set those as heading level 3s. And when I go back to my preview, just to show you the change, you'll see that you have this larger font to give you that visual confirmation that those elements have been set as headings. The standard font that we see here for these paragraphs, we're just going to ignore the paragraphs. They're doing fine as they are. They're just sitting inside of text zones as we would hope. So we don't really need to worry about them at all. We will just leave them alone for now. But the next most obvious challenge on this page is the list. So as we look at this list, it's very easy for a sighted user to interpret the different styles of bullet points and seeing how they are grouped together and they're indented inside of different bullet points. And so we can see that this is like a triple tiered nested list, and it's very easy to interpret based on the layout and the way that this is designed. However, to a machine like a screen reader, there's really nothing special about this. This is just a block of text on the page. Therefore, when you look at your HTML preview, you'll see that that list is really just going to be read as like some sort of strange run-on sentence. So there's really no way for a blind user to understand that these three items are grouped together as a list, and they are nested inside of this list item over here. And then that list item is combined with this list item over here. And together, those two list items are nested inside of this list item. So all of the visual layouts and clues that we get from the bullet points and the styling of this list is lost upon a blind user, and it would render the entire list to just be very confusing, if not misinforming them completely. So we need to make sure that it's properly tagged as a list. And this is very easy to accomplish. All I really need to do is hit L on my keyboard, L for list, and it will change the zone to a list zone, and it will drop me down to the list detector. And then I just nudge my slider on the list detector from left to right. And the artificial intelligence, which is a combination of computer vision and machine learning, will detect that there are two layers to this list. We have two main list items, and then there's a nested layer inside of that list item, which also contains another sub list inside of it. And if we go back to our preview, we will see that we have a nice, clean, nested list inside of our HTML preview that matches the structure of the list from the PDF. So we have our bullet points inside of our other bullet points, inside of our external layer to that list, just like the list that we see from the PDF. And the nice part of Equidox is that as a remediator, I don't have to write the tag tree manually. I don't have to create list label tags for the bullet points. I don't have to create list body tags for the text. I don't have to group them as list items. Equidox will do that for me. It's using its export engine, which is designed to build the tag tree that is required for this list automatically. So all I'm really doing as a remediator is identifying that this portion of the page is a list and using the detection slider to detect the content and then export the document, and the list will be created for me. If I look down here at the next section of the document, it is a table. And much like the list, the table is using layouts to convey information. So as a sighted user, it's pretty easy to see that like the accounting row header is visually aligned way over here with this $50,000 cell inside, or that cell is vertically aligned with Q4 as a column header. That Q4 falls underneath this 2027 up here. It's pretty easy to make all of these little visual puzzle pieces come together when you are looking at the table and seeing the grid lines and seeing how it's all laid out. But to a machine, this is nothing but a random series of clusters of text. And therefore, when you look at your HTML preview, this is probably the most glaring and obvious issue with this page. So you have all of these random numbers kind of grouped together, rendering that entire table to be essentially useless, because there's no way for someone using a screen reader to understand what that $200,000 is in reference to. So we need to fix this, of course. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to the PDF and I'm just going to draw a zone and place it right on top of the table. When I do that, I'm going to hit T on my keyboard, T for table, to change the zone to a table. And then I'm just going to double click on the table that I just created, and it will open up the table editor. Now, inside of the table editor, there are these green grid lines that you will initially see. You are more than welcome to click on these green grid lines and drag them around, and you can add rows, you can delete rows, you can add columns and delete columns if you'd like. But before I get too involved with making manual adjustments to these grid lines, I usually just use the table detector. So much like the list detector, the table detector is designed to automatically figure out table structure for you. So just by nudging the sliders, you will see that these green grid lines are now perfectly aligned with the cells within the table. And if you were to look at a preview of just the table, what you will find is that you have a nice, clean looking table, which is a huge improvement over this big wall of random data and numbers that we were getting from the main PDF page. So it's a huge improvement, but it's not perfect just yet. There's two little things that we need to clean up. First and foremost, in the very top row, you'll notice that the year 2026 is like duplicated in two cells and flanked by empty cells on either side. And the same story for 2027. This is purely just an issue with the fact that the years are column headers that are spanning across 4 separate columns. So we just need to consolidate these cells together to avoid that duplication and also to clean up the empty cells, because we don't want empty column headers in our table. So all I'm going to do is click inside of the cell where I want the span to begin, hold Shift on my keyboard, and then click in the cell where I want the span to finish. I can then hit the span button, and those cells will then all be consolidated together. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'll just span across. And when I go back to my preview, you will see that now I have a single year that is straddling the 4 columns that it correlates with. The other quick thing that I need to address is in Equidox, we assume by default that your table has a 1-to-1 ratio of column and row headers, because that is just the average run-of-the-mill table that you will find in the world, where your top row are your column headers and your far left column are your row headers. This table, however, has 2 levels of column headers, because not only is the year a specific or a column header, but you have a specific column header for each individual quarter within the year. So we want to make sure that we change our column header from the default 1-to-1 setting. We're going to change it to 2 column headers. And when I do that and go back to the preview, we will see the bold font for that second row, indicating that those cells will also be tagged as headers in this table when we export the document. So the way that this works for a screen reader user is no longer are they stuck in this crazy reading order of random numbers being thrown at them as that table is read kind of in a randomized left to right, top to bottom way. Now a screen reader user can navigate this table and extract accurate information from it. Perhaps they only are interested in the marketing row, and maybe they are looking for a specific cell within that marketing row. If they are in this cell here, they know they're in the marketing row. They know that they are within the scope of 2027, but more specifically Q2 of 2027. So they can roam around this table, and wherever they end up, they always know which column and row headers they're associated with. So they're not lost and they're not stuck reading a bunch of random numbers that would do nothing more than confuse them, because this is not how that information is intended to be read out loud. So what I'll do is I will save the table and I will close out of it. And when I do, I return to the main PDF, and all of those little zones that were there before that were covering up all of the individual cells, they have now been replaced by just one single table zone. And if I run a preview of the entire page at this point, you'll see that it looks quite a bit cleaner than where we were before. However, there is one issue now that kind of jumps out at me, and that's the reading order. Take note that the footer, which is at the very, very bottom of the page, has somehow jumped in front of the table in the reading order. And the reason why this happened is because I initially had 44 total zones on this page. A lot of them were, represented by like this table where individual cells were being tagged as text. So when I clicked and dragged to create a new table zone, it became reading zone 45 just by default. That was the lowest available number. However, I can just come up here to the top and hit the reorder button, and everything will be reshuffled in a left to right, top to bottom flow. So when I go back to my preview, you will see that now I have my table editor heading level 3 directly followed by the table itself. And then the footer is the final element read on the page. So now my reading order is more or less correct for the page, and I don't have to worry about the screen reader kind of skipping around and reading random information in the wrong order. Reading order is super important for PDF accessibility. I would rank it as probably the most important aspect because even if the tags are correct, if they are presented in the wrong order, it can have a huge impact on the way that it's interpreted. So you can really skew the meaning of things if you are reading it out of order. With Equidox, there's multiple ways to adjust the reading order. So if you look up at the top here, there is a drop-down menu where you can change the reading order to 1, 2, 3, or 4 columns, depending on the layout of the page. There might be reasons where you have multi-column options for articles and things like that. But most pages, you can probably just hit the reorder button, and it will reorder things left to right, top to bottom, as the average PDF page in the world is probably intended to be read. However, there could be pages where you have just more unique layouts, and maybe there are certain zones that just aren't going to cooperate with any of these 4 options. So with Equidox, you can change the order of the individual zone. Let's just use the heading level 1, for example. This is currently reading zone number 2 on the page. And if we want this to be read first on the page, I could, of course, change it from 1 to 2, or from 2 to 1. And then I could go up here to the logo, and I could change logo, which is number 1. I could change that from 1 to 2. So I could flip-flop the zones around. That wouldn't be that big of a deal. But what you can do with Equidox is you can actually use the decimal system. So instead of having to adjust multiple zones, I could just turn the reading zone number 2 into 0.2 by putting a period in front of it. And if I go back to my preview, what I'll find is that my heading level 1 is now the first element on the page, where it will be read first, and then everything else will slot in behind it. So that is a very simple example of when you can use the decimal system. But you can imagine pages where you have a lot of zones, and maybe there are a couple of zones that are just not cooperating. You don't want to have to shuffle 20 zones around to make room for the ones that are out of order and play musical chairs with every zone on the page. That would be very tedious and very slow. So using the decimal system allows you to just grab the one zone or the few zones that are out of order on the page and squeeze them in wherever they belong using the decimals, and then everything else will just fall in place around it. So it's a sneaky little trick that will save you quite a bit of time when it comes to getting the accurate reading order set up for the page. Last but not least on this PDF, before we're done, we have 2 images. Now, these images are relatively simple. It's just a logo. So we have the Equidox logo right here. All I'm going to do is click on it and come over here to the description field, and I will type in Equidox logo just to make sure that there is an alt text applied to that image. And then the other image down here is really another logo. It's another Equidox logo, but this one has a dog in the picture. Now, this is not a document that has anything to do with dogs. This is really just an image that I've put there to take up some space on the page. Otherwise, I would have had like a big empty rectangle with no content to place in there. So just as a decorative element, I added this picture of the dog with the Equidox logo. I don't really want to type in a big description talking about the fact that I have a border collie with its paws on top of the logo. That doesn't really add any technical value to the page for a screen reader user. So I can also just hit backspace while I have that image selected. That image will disappear. The image zone will disappear. And if you go to your preview, you'll see that it's no longer included in the HTML. So I don't have to waste time typing in a description for it. And then the screen reader user doesn't have to waste time listening to an image, which is really not of any value. It's just there as a decoration. So that is now an artifacted image, and I'm just leaving the screen reader user the heading structure, the paragraphs, the list, the table, the footer, which contains a link inside of it, the alt text on my single version of the Equidox logo. So I know that this page is now kind of streamlined and it's going to work really well with a screen reader user. I can see all of the evidence of that in this HTML. And I'm ready to mark the page validated by hitting this check mark and close out of it. And I hit validate just to remind myself that I have finished this page. It's probably more valuable on longer documents. Again, using the hypothetical 200-page report example, chances are if you have a 200-page report, you're probably not going to do it all in one sitting. You might be picking that document apart, 15 minutes at a time over the course of a couple of weeks as you have little windows of opportunity in your schedule. Most people don't have the patience or the open calendar where they can just sit there and go through hundreds of pages in a row. So without having to memorize which pages you worked on or which pages you skipped, or if you shared the document with someone else and they worked on some pages for you, you're not stepping on each other's toes. You're not wasting your time clicking around in the document. You know for sure that this page has been worked on, so you could pick up where you left off and work on different pages. Now that I'm done, though, working on this document, I am going to go to the Export tab. You can hit the Export to PDF button up here, and that's totally fine. But down below, you have the Export tab, and this gives you some different options. So I just wanted to call this out. You have the PDF format, which is your kind of default format, which most of our users are exclusively exporting to. And really, all you have to do is hit Generate PDF, and Equidox will produce a brand new document for you. This new document is going to pop open in your browser. So here it is rendering in like a new tab in my browser. It is the same document that I started with. So you can see nothing is visually different about this document in any way. But if I were to download it, and I'll put it over on my desktop so I don't get them mixed up, this document is now fully tagged. And most importantly, it's accurately tagged. So the tag structure that we see here inside of Acrobat, if you're an Acrobat user, then you're probably used to looking at tag trees just like this. If you've never used Acrobat or you're not really sure what any of this means, it's okay. You don't have to use Acrobat as any part of this remediation effort. This is really just a reflection of what we saw in the HTML preview. So walking through it, the tag structure is going to start with this H1 tag for heading level 1. The second tag is the figure tag, which is really just the image of the Equidox logo, which we know we have described. The next tag will be the H2, and then we have a P tag for the paragraph, another H2, another paragraph, an H3, and then the list. Now the list, if you've never used Acrobat before, it looks like a very harmless little list tag, like what could be so difficult about it? But what you'll see if you start expanding the tags is there is so much more to a list than what meets the eye. And Equidox does the hard part for you. It automatically recognizes all of the different elements of the list, and it builds this tag tree for you. Very, very good, fast, and technical remediators spend probably 20 minutes setting up a tag tree like this, because there are so many steps involved. There are so many little things that you need to click on and move around and drag into the right position. There's a million ways to do this wrong. There's only one way to do it right. The good thing is that Equidox knows how to do it the right way. All we had to do was detect the list using the artificial intelligence, and it will build this tag tree for you, which again is probably saving 20 to 30 minutes. And if you don't have a lot of technical experience and training and background in using Acrobat, you could have all day and you're probably never going to accidentally build something like this. It's just very, very complicated. So Equidox does all of that heavy lifting for you. The next element is the H3, and then you have the table below. And much like the table, or much like the list rather, the table looks like a harmless table tag. So how complicated could it be? Well, again, there are many tags within that table. And what would take me, probably a half an hour to build in Acrobat takes me 10 to 20 seconds inside of Equidox because I'm really just using the sliders to detect the table. I'm doing a couple of quick spans where I have these sort of merged headers, and then I have 2 levels of column headers. So all I have to do is change my column header from 1 to 2. So it's really just a few clicks and I'm done with the table. I would spend at least 30 minutes building this tag tree if I'm doing it manually in Acrobat. The final tag is the paragraph, and the paragraph contains the link inside of it. And if you were to run the accessibility checker on a document like this, which is something that a lot of people do, everything that would have been failing before, all of these different criteria would have lit up with red X's. You'll see now everything is passing. The only 2 things that remain are these little question marks. And these are not failures. So if you're, again, a new Acrobat user, don't panic if you see these. These come out with every document, no matter what. This is just Acrobat reminding you that it does not know what the reading order should be. So check that manually. Acrobat has no concept of reading order. This could be a serpentining flow chart for all Acrobat knows. So you, as the remediator, you've already checked the reading order using the HTML preview in Equidox. We just looked at the tag panel in Acrobat. We know that the reading order is good to go, so we're just ignoring that check. It's also reminding you to check the color contrast. The thing about color contrast is it really needs to be considered ahead of time. You don't want to be in a position where you are editing individual PDF documents for colors, changing fonts, changing the size of things, moving new fonts in or swapping old backgrounds out. It gets very, very messy when you start trying to visually alter a PDF. So color contrast really should be considered when you are designing your templates, picking out your fonts, picking out your color palettes, and setting up different style guides that you're going to be using for your documentation. You really don't want to create a bunch of PDFs from a bad template and then go back and individually edit each PDF for how it looks to meet color contrast requirements. So by and large, we just ignore these 2 little question marks because we know that the reading order is good. And color contrast, there's really only so much that can be done within reason. You really should be thinking about this early in advance of when you're creating these PDFs, when you're doing the sort of setting up of the document in the source file. So InDesign or Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or wherever the document is coming from, that's when you want to be worrying about your color contrast. At this point, it's a little bit too little too late. So this document is fully accessible, fully compliant, ready for public posting, perfect for usage with the screen reader. It is good to go. And so you then have a new PDF document that you've just taken from something that was completely untagged, and you've turned it into a perfectly accessible PDF document. And I know that that's a slow, long-winded way of getting there, but I promise at full speed, this entire process takes me less than 1 minute to accomplish all of that. So you'll get into the rhythm of using it and you will really pick up the pace. And it's a pretty dramatic time savings when you extrapolate it out over the course of dozens of documents and hundreds of pages. If you're spending upwards of an hour on this page in Acrobat, and I'm spending 45 seconds to a minute on it in Equidox, you can really see how that time savings just piles up even after just a handful of documents. The other thing about the export tab, the one thing I wanted to mention, you can also convert your document to HTML. So if you have a reason why you want to get away from the PDF format, you can also export this to just like a simple HTML file. You can also convert it into EPUB as well. EPUB is a derivative of HTML, so they have a lot of similarities, but you have different format choices. And one of the other tabs here says zones. So I want to mention the zones tab because this is an important detail of Equidox. And this is a feature that's very unique and it really only applies to Equidox. So what I can do with Equidox is I am able to hit this button here that says download zones. Now, when I download the zones, it just comes out in like a little zip file, and it's really not that exciting or interesting to look at for us. But the point is that you have those zones and the information about them on your hard drive. Now, let's say hypothetically, you've worked on this document and you're very proud of the remediation that you've done, and then someone makes a last minute edit. They want to fix a typo, or the data within this table gets updated every week, and it's basically the exact same layout and formatting, but the document does get modified week to week or month to month, and it's always getting changed. And you're very frustrated as a remediator because you find yourself doing the same basic stuff over and over and over again. Well, with Equidox, what you can do is let's just say hypothetically I've made a change. I'm going to import the original version. I'm going to just, pretending that we've made a change. Let's bring a new document in here. I am able to take the work that I've done from one version of the document, and I can apply it to a second version of the document. So I am able to take this one here, which I'll put a label on it so we don't get them confused. I'll call it document 1, and I'll call this one here document 2. I now have the zones from this document, and I can go into this one here that I've just imported moments ago, keeping in mind that this document is just like the one we started with. There's no heading structure, there's no list, there's no table. It is just a big mess like the original version that we were working on. But if I click on zone transfer, I can say that I want to upload the document zones, and then I just have to click this paperclip and select the zip folder that I downloaded and press upload. And it just takes a brief second. But when I go back into the document now, everything that I did to the first version now applies over here to version number 2. So here's my Equidox logo description. Here's my heading structure. Here's my list. Here's my table. As a remediator, I don't have to redo all of the work just because someone made a change to the source file. I'm able to save the work that I've done ahead of time and apply it to subsequent versions. It can be a massive time saver if you have the right use cases. If you have a document that is completely unique, one of one, there's nothing else like it, it's never going to get modified, it's just an old document that has to live on your website, then maybe there is no real need for the zone transfer feature. But for those recurring reports or the last minute typo corrections, that sort of situation, you are able to use zone transfer to save yourself a ton of work. So there's creative ways of using it. I just wanted to point out that as a possibility for your different use cases if you have any that in mind that align with that. So with all that said, that is a crash course through Equidox. I appreciate it for making it this far into the video. We are happy to discuss your personal use cases and documents and situations that you might be up against when it comes to PDF remediation. But the idea of this video was just to give you an introduction so that you understand the basics of how Equidox works. Keep in mind with Equidox, if you do move forward with any licensing, training and support is included. And so you can submit support tickets. You can get in touch with our team. If you need help, if you need guidance, you can always get in touch. Training is included with the software as well. So we want to make sure that all of your users, whether they are brand new to accessibility or if they are experts with a decade of experience using Acrobat, are properly trained on how to use Equidox and get the most out of it. So that is all baked into the pricing of the licensing. And so again, I appreciate everyone for following along for this long of a demo. And please reach out if you have any follow-up questions or would like to move forward with a purchase of Equidox. Thank you very much and have a great day. For more information about how Equidox Software Company can help you with PDF accessibility, email us at equidoxsales@equidox.co or give us a call at 216-529-3030 or visit our website at www.equidox.co.